So we have to render, if you will, the Dasein transparent, right? In order to make Dasein the inquirer into, first of all, the existential analytic. So that's what it's about, at least in terms of this first movement. The second movement we're going to go with from being in the world to temporality, and again, remembering that this is being thought under the horizon of time. And then the third movement onto modifications, and this is where we'll get into more of the political effects of Heidegger with authenticity and authenticity. What does it mean to authentically totalize? I'll make hopefully some connections to Sartre's notion of good and bad faith in being and nothingness, and in his sections on concrete relations with others. And so we'll be doing that, and of course other other aspects that might not be on this list. Anyway, so everybody's here. Arto went out for a second, and Nori's here. Okay. Section 7 is very important because it's the method. And I want to point out that Heidegger is always going to deal with the phenomena or the things themselves first, and he's developing a method from that. So this is a way of avoiding dogma, right? And in a different way, it's a way of dealing against, any kind of presupposed, preconditioned method, which is very good. Okay, I think this is a very good aspect of Heideggerian moment. Last week I went through multiple definitions of the verb hermenein, the multiple levels of that. That's going to be important as we go forward because he's going to consider his method, at least in terms of rendering things explicit, the hermeneutical ontology. That's the method at one level, right? The other one is the descriptive level, which is the transcendental phenomenological method. And I'm going to talk about that first today, but let me just go back a second to mention once again. So last week we did or 2 weeks ago, the multiple definitions of hermeneutics, and how that plays out in Heidegger. Yeah. The little Daseins, huh? Little entities. So let me just give you once again. I think everybody was here for that. Yes, the hermeneutics, to explain, to utter, represent, to carry over, in other words, to translate, to appropriate, to announce. You have this kind of announcement that's always going on, an enunciation, right? To send over the disruption of a method, right? Or a dispatching of a message. So you have multiple functions here, 7 basic functions. And as most of you probably know, I think I mentioned this, that Hermes, actually in Greek mythology, was the cattle, thief, who was the messenger who would go from one ranch to the other, if you want to put it this in Texas. But anyway, going from one agrarian community to another and saying, who's stealing your cattle? So he kind of became the messenger, and then a part of the divinity as the one who brings the message. How we say, who's the messenger? Well, you're really saying who's Hermes in this case, right? Who's the messenger? And you can ask the questions: explaining, uttering, representing, carrying over, appropriating, translating, or dispatching what? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if he's related in the mythology to Cacus, I think is the Roman god who
probably afterwards.
Lived in a cave,
yes,
and
right.
came out and stole cattle, but pulled them back.
Right.
By their tails, and then he could tell the villagers that all the cattle came from him.
Yes.
Even though at night he was stealing them all.
He's stealing them all, right, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, the treatise Aristotle wrote was a logical structure, really, of judgment, how we make judgments, through hermeneutics. So Aristotle actually wrote a treatise on this, and again, in the spirit of the Heideggerian retrieve of the tradition, this Aristotle or Aristotelian text of called the Hermeneutics really gave us the logical structures of judgment. This is what Aristotle does with it, and it's basically what happens when meaning is in language is transferred to one world to another. So there's always this concept of world that is also associated with interpretation and hermeneutical circles. So you always have this concept of world operating. So and then with hermeneutics again, very important because Dilthey uses it as method of interpretation and explanation, and this is how it takes its point in the Geisteswissenschaften, which are the human sciences or the spiritual sciences in Germany. And this was known as the spiritual sciences or the human sciences in German, which Wilhelm Dilthey was very important. Explanation and understanding. And this became an interpretive model. And alongside of this, interestingly, is the Polizeiwissenschaften, the police sciences that are developing out of Napoleon, but given a German twist. So it's very interesting. You begin to see much earlier than the Third Reich. There's the preparation of the disciplinary society, that is happening. And there's a kind of, if you want to think of this dialectically, there's this struggle, tension always going on between the spiritual sciences, or what the French ultimately call the human sciences. What we call the humanities, very, very in a pale way. Right? We don't talk of human science. We don't talk of, the spiritual sciences or etc. And this is a very, very encompassing term. So anyway, this had a hermeneutic appeal, especially in Dilthey in the 19th century. All right, so and speaking of hermeneutics, I want you to realize that Dasein is hermeneutical. Design is not only going to describe the matters themselves, but is going to be in an active position always of interpretation. And we're going to begin again with the existential analytic in this case. Okay? And I'll probably go back and forth to this. This is always the condition for the possibility of any form of research. You must have this hermeneutical base, right? So let me put the word up here for you. I know it's a big word. Hermeneutics, or the art of interpretation. I'm talking about the hermeneutical base, if you will, for any meaning, right? So the meaning of being is going to be approached through a hermeneutic, right? In Heidegger's sense, in the way he uses hermeneutic. It's not only explanation and understanding. Again, that's why I gave you multiple definitions here. I'm not one to stay strict within the definitions, but it's good to see the multi-layers of the use of the word. The explanation, what is the utterance? What is the enunciation? What is being represented? What is being appropriated? All these things are happening under the hermeneutic, circle in the hermeneutic guides. So, okay. So, anyway, so I want to go today to and again, let me just do one other thing. I'm sorry. It's not only Dilthey, but then it's Friedrich Schleiermacher, who applies hermeneutics to biblical texts. And this became a new form of biblical exegesis. a new form of biblical exegesis, of whom Heidegger's very well aware of, Friedrich Schleiermacher, who's very, very pronounced in, I don't know if you've heard of these people, Rudolf Otto, The Idea of the Holy, Rudolf Bultmann, all of these people were part of a school, negative theological school, sort of, that branched out from Heidegger, that took up Schleiermacher and Heidegger as, interpreters of scripture, or interpreters of a kind of negative theology in the 20th, early, the turn of the century and further. Very active during the 20s and 30s, and in fact, negative capability of Keats is used by these people very actively as a strategy, right? And in terms of interpretation. So I wanted to mention that as well. So anyway, Jameson takes up the word in The Political Unconscious. The first chapter is a kind of an attempt for a Marxist hermeneutics. If you read that again, he's trying to do a kind of research that's based on, the hermeneutical model, right? But it's a materialistic hermeneutic with imagination. How do we rewrite the city of God from a Marxist perspective? How do you revisit St. Augustine in terms of the social economic forces? How does all this integrate? And hermeneutics gives us a very interesting approach to this. So I suggest too that you want to read a materialistic hermeneutics in the sense that we use materialistic. Jameson's introduction to the political unconscious is very good on this matter. It's a long essay, about 90 pages, called The Political Unconscious. And then the rest are essays. He actually puts it into practice with the work of Joseph Conrad, and I think, what's the name of that? George Gissing, the English novelist, and I think one other person, but yeah, Conrad, Gissing, and one, I forgot who the third was. But anyway, an interesting approach. Okay, so I want to go to the text because this is a very rich section, and it's on method, and hopefully we'll have enough time to go to design. It was much more pleasant in the other room, I have to say, in terms of the circulation of air. Okay, so we left off, and if you want to turn to page 26, begins basically Heidegger's the phenomenological method of the investigation, right? Into the question, why have we forgotten the question of being and the meaning of being, right? And ultimately, the distinction that he's making between ontological and ontic as well. Okay, so Section 7, the entire Section 7. Section 7, the phenomenological method of the investigation. I think Macquarie's translation is pretty close to this. She used that translation and then tried to improve.
Okay.
So you have basically the fundamentals there. And that was used by a very, very powerful generation, so it didn't really hurt their minds, We'll see whether this one does.
This one is not so.
Yeah, we don't know yet. Yeah.
All right.
That's 1962. And this one is a revised, a second edition of 2010. But this was circulating in manuscript as early as 1990, I think.
You changed a lot the translation, or is
No,
it
somewhat. Not. In some ways, yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
But that's still very adequate for
We'll
the
find
time.
that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay,
Okay.
good. Okay. So, maybe we'll start by reading, and then I have something to present again. So, with the preliminary characterization of the thematic object of the investigation, and again, remember he's doing the thematic, the being of beings, or the meaning of being in general. Its method too would appear to be already prescribed. He's going to take that out. The task of ontology is to set in relief the being of beings and to explicate being itself. And the method of ontology remains questionable in the highest degree as long as we wish merely to consult historically transmitted ontologies or similar efforts. So we're not going to be doing an accumulation or a synthesis of previous ontologies here. He's going to set out on his own way. Since the term ontology is used in a formally broad sense for the investigation, the approach of clarifying its method by tracing the history of that method is automatically precluded. I can imagine you answering Stanley today, what is ontology, with this. Anyway, that would have been great. In using the term ontology, we do not specify, and this is good, any particular philosophical discipline standing in relation to others. It should not at all be our task to satisfy the demands of any established discipline. Very important as well. On the contrary, such a discipline can be developed only from the objective necessity of particular questions and procedures, and again, very important, demanded by the things themselves. Okay? The matters themselves. Okay? All right. The battle cry of phenomenology as a discipline in Husserl was back to the things themselves.
Is that
We have
Ding
lost.
C?
No, that's the thing in itself.
That's different.
It is different. Yes, it is different. The Kantian thing that you just brought up is the Kantian notion, and I'm just going to try to save on paper, right? Ding and sick is the thing in itself. Ding is German for thing, right? One definition of thing, yeah, but it's the most common use, right? So this thing in itself, right, is the Kantian notion that is between the phenomenal realm, that which appears, right, versus the noumenal realm. Right? And this is the unknown X that we never can get. So you have a Kantian dualism that is operative in the tradition. Only that which appears. Right? So this began the old appearance, reality distinction that you see in many texts in philosophy.
Ding on C is the noumen.
But yes, it's part of the noumenal range. It's the thing in itself that we never ultimately get to. Okay? In the noumenal. Okay? This X. Hegel brings this thing together into just one object and the subject, right? Together. Tries to dialectically solve this problem by bringing it into the subject-object always in movement, right? Etc. There's nothing we can't know. Right? Ultimately, it's an absolute. Hey, Sam, how you doing? Yeah. I have to get you a chair. Well, this one, yeah. So anyway, so Heidegger. First of all, Husserl, in order to kind of overcome what we can't know, makes a battle cry for phenomenological bracketing, suspension of reality, to get back to the things themselves, where you put out all content of your mind and you're only going to look at form. You're bracketing out something, and you're in an initial relation, if you will, of retention and protension. So, for the phenomenology, when you observe an object, right, you're only retaining what the matter demands, right? You're retaining that in memory, right, and you're protending that object as a phenomena or as a perspective, right? So the protension is the equivalent of perception. Yeah. Okay. The retention is the memory, right? In some ways, right? So what the prothesis, for example, in Bernard Stiegler, is a kind of protension, right, that's going on, the perspective of technics and us being prosthetics in the beginning, right, that this is what we are as Daseins, if you want to use Heideggerian language. And at the same time, the retention, it can be either the anonymic, the long-term recollected memory, or just the memory of the moment that's already in the perspective of what's being retained, right? Or the hyponemata, right? In a sense. So this is a phenomenological investigation proceeds on this. So when you study a phenomena, the matter itself, you are engaged in this process of perceiving. You know, it's the perception is primary, absolutely primary. Right? There's nothing in terms of, you know, and also this is eidetic. It's of the sight. It's of sight. You're seeing. It's a way of seeing. Okay. Tell me if it, you know, if it's too much. I mean, you know, because I'm trying to maybe ground this in a way vis-a-vis method. So Heidegger is going to appropriate the transcendental phenomenological method from Husserl, right? And there's no longer this thing of the thing in itself, you know, or the Nuemel phenomenal reign. All we're dealing with is back to the things themselves. And we're trying to get into this, right, in a way that the matter demands of us a method that will allow us to make explicit what is there, right? So the method is not presubscribed, right? It's already, so you're beginning with maybe almost an intuition of essences, if you will, right? An intuition of the essences, rather than a preconceptual nexus, a preconceptual connection. It's all going on at the intuitive level, an intuition of essences. And of course, there are many debates about this. I just want to say, is the initial intuition of essences really built upon argument, or is it really pure intuition that we're going towards? And you know, this raises a lot of questions. For Derrida, the matter itself is always contaminated, right? We're always in the pharmacon. Right, so to speak. I mean, this is one thing he wants to talk. There's no such thing as a pure phenomenology, even though this was the goal of an Edmund Husserl, you know, and certainly Heidegger at the descriptive level. So this is descriptive phenomenology. I want you to understand that when you look at an object, say you're going to, you know, Josh makes a painting and then he looks at it, he has to do the description of that from the standpoint of protension, retention. The object itself demands the method by which he, you know, is going to do it. You don't bring a preconceived, you know, thing to the canvas or to the sculpture of the making of something. This is what he's really talking about in terms of, you know, that you are only describing the matter itself. Right? So this is also about intentionality. How does our mind, right, perceive the objects in the world? What is our intention to this? How do correlate objects, you know, operate with us, right? How do we constitute these objects in the world? So he's asking these questions and at the same time trying to follow this through descriptively, right, in terms of a method, right, to get back to the question of being, right, as well as the meaning of being. So the description, oh boy, we got the...
Two different kinds of screaming, I guess.
The intuition of essences, is that bracketing?
It's the goal. Wesenschauen.
Okay.
The art of seeing or intuiting essences, right? And that's the process that Husserl is going through. So Wesenschauen, back to the things themselves. Yes, I know, I am too. Yeah. Yeah. We can thank her confusion for this one. I already yelled at her. Yeah. I didn't know. So, yeah. So, I mean, I want you to understand that, you know, Heidegger, in a way, even though he doesn't mention Husserl often, has actually taken from Husserl this transcendental phenomenological method, and we're going to see it at work. Let's go back to the text. I'll come back to this too. So, yeah. So the matters themselves will demand, you know, we're demanded by the things themselves. Page 26, Sam, a second paragraph, the end of it. So with the guiding question of the being, the investigation arrives at the fundamental question of philosophy in general. And you know, he speaks this way, the fundamental question of philosophy in general. The treatment of this question is phenomenological, With this term, the treatise dictates for itself neither a standpoint nor a direction. we don't have a standpoint and we don't have a direction, because phenomenology is neither of these. And this is negation of the negation. Stanley should have talked about neither this nor that today in terms of, dialectics. But anyway, that's all right. Or just not this and what thisness and thatness is in Hegel. But yeah, maybe next week. All right. The expression phenomenology signifies primarily a concept of method. Not only a method, but a concept of method. It does not categorize the what of the objects of philosophical research in terms of their content, but the how. Very, very important. The how, the research. The more genuinely effective a concept of method is, and the more comprehensively it determines the fundamental conduct of a science, the more originally is it rooted in confrontation with the things themselves. You don't really see the things themselves if you're bringing a preconceived method to the phenomena, right? You have to, again, let the thing itself see you, put it metaphorically, before you see it, right? You have to let it be as it is, right? And farther away it moves from what we call a technical device, of which there are many in the theoretical disciplines. Okay? So the term phenomenology expresses a maximum that can be formulated, and I've already mentioned this, to the things themselves. That's the formula, that's the battle cry. For Freud, it was wo es war, ich werden. Where it was, I shall become. Or where, where the unconscious was, I shall become. In some ways. But in Husserl, to the matters themselves, to the things themselves. It is opposed to the free-floating constructions and accidental findings, also opposed to taking over concepts only seemingly demonstrated, and likewise to pseudo-questions which are spread abroad as problems for generations.
That's what we were talking about earlier.
Yes, we were. Yeah. It's good, huh? Yeah. Yeah. But one might object that this maxim is, above all, abundantly self-evident, and moreover an expression of the principle of all scientific knowledge, which you brought up in terms of the reading of Marcuse, that paragraph that you cited. Yes, absolutely. And you can see the influence of this on Marcuse. In his thesis, and even in Reason and Revolution, where there's no mention of Heidegger, or in the note on dialectic, you can see the thinking, how much this is pervaded in many ways. All right? So, it is not clear why this commonplace should be explicitly put in the title of our research. In fact, we are dealing with something self-evident, which we want to get closer to insofar that it is important for the clarification of the procedure in our treatise. We shall explicate only the preliminary, and again, preliminary concept of phenomenology. He's very, very careful and very slow, right, in many ways. And it's like Descartes in the Discourse on Method. He never really gets to the fundamentals of the method until the fourth method, right? So this has a long philosophical, history behind it in terms of style. And so, again, it is opposed, right, to all free-floating, etc. Yeah. It is not clear why this comes to be entitled. In fact, we are dealing with something self-evident which we want to get closer to insofar as the clarification and the preliminary concept. The expression has two components, and he's going to break down. And this is typical Heidegger, and I think it's a good thing because it begins to give you a sense of how, compound words come to be, as well as, I think, one thing that's totally lacking in the educational system that should be reoriented, probably in second grade, is etymology. Material and etymology. Etymos logos, which is the root of the Greek root of the word for etymology, means the authentic meaning, the authentic account. Etymos logos. Yeah. In fact, in the modern Greek, and this is kind of interesting, etymos literally means, instead of being true or authentic, it means, are you ready? So in a way, have you been taught, or are you ready? Has the propedeutic worked? in a sense. I mean, I'm playing on a vernacular use, an everyday usage, but, reversing it to, kind of its original roots here. Okay, so you have the readiness. Okay, so the phenomenon and the logos. Viewed extrinsically, the word phenomenology is formed like the terms theology, biology, sociology, translated as the science of God, life, and the community. Accordingly, phenomenology would be the science of phenomena. This preliminary concept of phenomenology is to be exhibited by characterizing by what is meant by the two components, phenomena and logos, and establishing the meaning of the word, which is the result of their combination. The history of a word, is that the same in your...
It's just put together, which is the same thing.
Put together? Okay, instead of combination. Well, it's an older generation, right? The history of the word itself would originated presumably with the Wolffian school, and that's a reference to the modern treatise on ontology by Wolff in Germany. Right? He's saying, forget this. Right? Again, remember, Heidegger's really trying to take over the academy. Right? He's trying to take over the institution. So in a way, this destruction of previous models, etc., are involved, but actively by Heidegger. It's a monster. This is a very violent work. I mean, in a sense. The more I read it, I see, I was telling Arto, you want to say it?
Well,
Yeah.
just this section in particular, you can see where Derrida gets his violent method
Yes,
from
indeed.
of deconstruction.
Indeed,
and
yes.
the way he breaks down phenomena
Indeed.
and logos and
Yeah.
puts it together.
Yeah, Derrida very coyly said in an interview with Guy Rossolto, who's a psychoanalyst and an active participant in a much older French Communist Party, he said to him, we have not begun to exhaust the critical resources of the Heideggerian enterprise. He says this in 1971, and he continued reading Heidegger until the end, in the end. And we can talk a little bit after we get a little more into this. We can see if the deconstructive move is more powerful than the positive destruction of the history of metaphysics. Who is really going to overcome metaphysics, and is that really possible? Because the claim is on some part that the Heideggerian enterprise is still more powerful than the Derridian in terms of its approach to metaphysics. The deconstructionists do not exceed the Heideggerian problematic. So we can talk about that. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you when we get there. You can begin by definitions if you want.
I'm going to be disappointed.
Yeah, that's all right. That's okay. I never had an appointment, so it's that's what people used to say. You're waiting for Godot? I said, no, I never had an appointment. So the Greek expression phenomenon, from which the word for the verb to show itself. So what phenomenalizes is really showing itself, right? Yeah, and you can work with this on all this stuff in the newspapers now. There's a comedy kid, right, etc. It's just another phenomenon, right? What's his name? Louis K. Louis K. C.K. I don't know these people. These are all news to me. But anyway, what shows itself, the self-showing, and the manifest, right? So, and this is interesting here too, because now we have, we can be Derridian here too and sexualize it. But phenomena is a middle voice construction of phenon, right? Phenon. To bring into daylight, to place into brightness, right? Interesting, huh? Belongs to the root pha and os, right? Light or brightness. Phosphorus, right? Another Greek word, that comes out of this, the form. Yeah? That is, that within something can become manifest, and this is interesting, visible in itself, right? Back to the in itself, but also, if you want to speak, again, like with Lefebvre and with Marcuse, the dialectic in itself, right, in a way. It's already visible in itself, right, in the object. Thus, the meaning is established as what shows itself in itself, what is manifest. The phenomenon, are thus the totality which lies in the light of day or can be brought to light. Now, I'm always think, again, I know I did this when we were at LIU earlier. Samantha, you were there, right? When we did the allegory of the cave and the various levels and all of this. Well, part of the allegory of the cave, maybe the most important part, is the blindness that the person, has going back into the cave, right? And then, of course, being chastened, but basically killed for bringing knowledge back to those without the knowledge, those prisoners in the, So the light of day is also on the level, in the Platonic universe, on the level of appearance, not reality, right? We're not at the real. We're only at the level of that which appears, right? As phenomena, right? We're manifest. So the Greeks simply identified this with ta onta, the beings. Not being, ta onta, right? Beings can show themselves from themselves in various ways, depending on the mode of access. The possibility even exists that they can show themselves as they are not in themselves. In this self-showing, beings look like, or self-showing, such self-showing we call seeming. So he's going to go through many levels of perception here. What it means to be manifest, what it means to be self-seen, what it means to look like, and you can, use this kind of vocabulary rhetorically. You have a notion of the visual simile here, right? You're going to have some metaphorics ultimately here, right? Metaphoros, right, means to transport, but it's also the light of the transport.
Or as Hamlet says to Ophelia, I know not seems, lady.
That's good. And get thee to a nunnery after
Yeah.
that. Right? Yeah, right? I got it. Now I understand what that is. Yeah, okay. And so the expression phenomenon in Greeks, what looks like something, what seems a semblance, right? And you have semblance, as a notion, right? And you can take this further if you're reading modern thinkers, such as Jean Baudrillard, the simulacra, right? You begin to see this at work. Deleuze also, the notion of semblance and simulacra that he's going to use, right? So this is important. Okay, so phenomena agathon means a good that looks like, but in reality is not what it gives itself out to be. So he's using agathon because, as you remember, when I did the diagram of the theory of forms from book 6 and then continued a bit in book 7 of the Republic, that the object is the good, right? It's the good. And goodness, or the good, directs, right, in the world of reality, in the world of knowledge, in the world of cognition. It's being directed. So that I think he's very careful with his choice of words here. Again, this is a dialogue both with Plato and Aristotle, but in a very different way that it's happening. Right? It is extremely important for further understanding of this, see how what is named in both names, phenomena, both as self-showing and also as semblance, right, are structurally connected. Only because something claims to show itself in accordance with its meaning and all, that is, claims to be a phenomena, can it show itself as something that it is not, and can it only look like. The original meaning, phenomena, what is manifest, das Offenbar in German, is an interesting concept, a kind of laying bare, is this thing, already contains and is the basis of phenomenon, semblance. We attribute to the term phenomena the positive and original meaning of phenomenon, terminologically, and we separate the phenomena of semblance, shine, from it as a privative modification. But what both terms express has at first nothing to do with what is called appearance or even mere appearance. So we're getting to this kind of a priori level, if you will, or more originary experiential level of seeing. Right? Through looks like something, seems, etc. Yeah, almost a pre-ontological way of seeing, right? Through this word, right? Because we have not gotten to the level of appearance yet.
Which would be more like cognition based, or is it like?
No, appearance is just more brighter, if you will, or
Because
or
appearance
more
sounds
symptoms.
like visible to me.
Yes, well, he's playing on the German words
Yeah.
here, Erscheinung, and mere appearance, bloß Erscheinung.
Yeah.
Okay, so one speaks of appearance of symptoms of illness. What is meant by the occurrences in the body that show themselves, and in this self-showing as such indicates something that does not show itself? Right? Interesting, huh? Yeah, right? When such occurrences emerge, their self-showing coincides with the presence of disturbances that do not show themselves. So appearance, as the appearance of something, thus precisely does not mean that something shows itself. It means that something which does not show itself announces itself through something that does show itself. Appearing is not showing itself, but this not must by no means be confused with the privative not, which determines the structure of semblance. What does not show itself in the matter of what appears can also never seem. Indications, presentations, symptoms, and symbols have this fundamental, and remember, he's doing structure here.
This is semiology.
Yes, it is semiology. It's first-rate semiology, don't you think? I mean, yeah, no? Yeah, you like Saussure better?
Well, I have to read more.
Okay.
He has to get to the point.
Okay.
Come on, get to the
Hurry up, you take it slow. A lot of provisional stuff here.
And then the
Provisional.
book is
I
not
emphasize
finished.
the visional,
The
right?
book is not finished. Right?
Not even finished, no. This is just a little, yeah, anyway. I'm glad we bring, some, joy to this. It's not exactly Beethoven's hymn to joy. We're,
Find it.
yes, right. So have this fundamental formal structure of appearing, although they differ among themselves. Remember, he's describing structures here. Structures of what's appearing, right? Structures of what seems like, etc. Although appearing is never self-showing in the sense of phenomena, appearing is possible only on the basis. The condition for the possibility of something to appear is possible only on the basis of a self-showing of something. Right? But this self-showing makes appearing possible is not appearing itself. Appearing is an announcing of itself through something that shows itself. So, in English people says, well, apparently so. Right? This is a kind of example of vernacular that he's using here. Very much after the fact, right? An announcing of itself through something that shows itself. If we then say with the word appearance, we're pointing to something to which something appears without itself being an appearance, then the concept of phenomena is not thereby delimited, but it's presupposed. This presupposition, however, remains hidden because the expression to appear in this definition of appearance is used in two senses. That which is something appears means something makes itself known, and that is, does not show itself in the expression without itself being an appearance. Appearance means the self-showing. But this self-showing essentially belongs to the wherein in which something makes itself known. Accordingly, phenomena are never appearances. So this is really what, Husserl and Heidegger are trying to get to, the matter themselves, right? Not something that has appeared, right? But every appearance is dependent upon phenomena. So if we define phenomena with the help of a concept of appearance, it's still unclear. Everything is turned upside down, and a critique of phenomenology on this basis is surely a remarkable enterprise. So this is not a science of appearing or appearance, right? This is much more radical, getting back to the things themselves and to the matter itself. Radical in the sense of rerouting. Not radical, quote unquote, politically, the way we can use it. But in terms of the radical imagination, yes, rerouting the imagination, rooting it in the matters themselves. That's what the radical imagination is lacking today politically. It cannot attend to the matters themselves, whereas the surrealists, many of the great movements of the, are able to do that. Yes. It's okay. Elianic stranger. With her being. With her being. Has it withered away? Has being withered away yet? Okay. So you guys somewhat, this is what he's trying to do. He's trying to take on this tradition in philosophy who's going to deal with the appearance-reality distinction. He's trying to break this down, right, into the going back to the things themselves, phenomena, that which is phenomenalizes, right, takes place on the level of seeming, Scheinung, right, semblance, etc. He's describing structures, but in a way, it is not, you don't really need, appearance, right? There's something behind appearance always, right? Always behind it, if you will. Or below it is probably better put, So we're doing a kind of archaeology here. So the double meaning, right, we went through this, right? Self-showing does not show itself. If one designates also the genuine meaning of phenomena self-showing, we have three different states of affairs, right? And this is going to go back to, the disciplines again, how philosophy is done, right? That appearance can take on another meaning, right? So he's going on the meanings about appearance. The confusion is considerably increased, bottom of page 28, by the fact that appearance can take on another meaning. If one understands that which does the announcing, that which in itself showing indicates the non-manifest as what comes to the fore in the non-manifest itself and radiates from it in such a way that which is non-manifest is thought of as essentially never manifest. If this is so, then appearance is tantamount to production. And he uses the German word Hervorbringung, right? Or to what is produced. However, this does not constitute the real being of the producing or the productive, but is rather the appearance in the sense of mere appearance. What does the announcing and is brought forward indeed shows itself in such a way as the emanation of what it announces. It precisely and continually veils what it is in itself. Right? And this is going to go back to what maybe Kant does with the phenomena noumenal realms. Right? He's going to go back here to a sense about, uses the term Kant, the appearance in twofold way. On the one hand, appearance for him are the objects of empirical intuition. Going back to this thing about science, that which shows itself in intuition. This self-showing phenomena as the general originate sense is, on the other hand, appearance as the emanation of something that makes itself known but conceals itself in the appearance. Okay? Any questions? Because what I can do, yeah, sure.
You're using the word production. Is he referring to like the object that's produced doesn't reveal what its essence is, what it's produced of, like what it's made
That's
of?
correct, and also not in the sense of really making either. What is actually, produced, in a literal sense, because listen, he's using much vocabulary here. It's problematic because, there's a productive imagination versus the production itself, right? And he's really trying to deal with this Kantian language in terms of, production, right, and appearance together in order to overcome it and to go back to, again, the phenomena itself, back to the matter itself, right? And he's really actually working through here this whole Kantian notion of what phenomenality is. This is really what he's trying to do. Let me just see something here. I thought I did a couple of things here in terms of the transcendental phenomenological method. Let me just do this quickly. I'll go back to this, but he will use the word transcendence, right? And he defines transcendence as the transcendence pure and simple, right? That we transcend pure and simple. This is the old definition from the Middle Ages, right? And it's called, But the transcendental is also taking black, and think about this as steps. You step back into the conditions of the possibility, of understanding and seeing something, and then you step beyond into a world. This is where Dasein happens. So you have a twofold movement of a transcendental method, right? Because you're tracing back, right, the movement of where something originated from. Does that clarify a little bit? You're basically, you're doing a phenomenology because you're tracing back, the movement of where something originates from, right? So it's a two-step phenomenon. Both of them, you step back into the conditions for the possibility of something being known or becoming manifest, right? What were those possibilities? And at the same time, you're stepping beyond into a world itself, right? So the phenomena is back here, right? And you want to get back to its originate emergent sense, so you're taking a step back, in perception, right, if you will, right? And you trace back what you're seeing there. What were the conditions for the possibility of what I saw, right? Yeah, etc. And then you step beyond into a world. This is your, almost your ecstasies, your outstanding rightness. This is where the Dasein comes in. So this dual movement of the transcendental, right? So it's ontological in the sense, that you're always understanding, if you will. It's descriptive, right? In the sense that you make explicit, right, something that was always already in Dasein. You're making explicit something. You're making it manifest and you're making it appear. We're talking about a method that is trying to be. This is so horrible. Anyway, you're trying to again be attuned, right, to the matters themselves, always to the things themselves, right? There's a description going on where you're going to take a step back and look at what the phenomena is, right? And at the same time, you're stepping back to look at the conditions for its possibility. That's the transcendental, right? And then you're also stepping beyond into a world that allows you this ability to see it, right? So it's always this double step, if you want to think of it this way, right? So you make explicit, right, what is always already occurring, right? And we're talking about events here. We're talking about happenings as well, right? This is what's part of the thing. You're tracing back the movement of what springs forth, right? What springs forth. Again, this is the notion of the German word. So you have concepts like trace, right? Your trace, Yeah. And I got it. Okay, thanks. So you have a trace, right? So you have a two-step trace to the Ursprung, right? And then you're also you're stepping beyond, right? You're both stepping back in the trace, or taking a step back, and then you're taking a stepping beyond, right? It allows you to enter a world that begins to see, and describe those conditions of the possibility of the phenomena, right? What has appeared to us or what becomes manifest to us. So he's describing structures. This is very layered and very complex. He's describing structures that are going on in Dasein and in this relationship between being and beings, right? Always. So, yeah. But this is still an ontic investigation in some ways. So the two-step transcendental, we can call it, for the vernacular, the two-step transcendental dance, right? You take the step back to the always already, right? Trace, you're tracing back to the thing themselves, to see the object as it really is. And secondly, then you have the step beyond. Yeah. You have the step beyond. Hi, how you doing? Yeah. Can you tell them to shut up next door? No.
Yeah, Costa Diva, right down the hall. It's
Yeah,
annoying as
yeah.
all hell.
Right.
I'll just
So-
sit right
so,
here.
and-
There's no
anyway.
chair behind, so I'll make it.
Yeah,
I'm so
yeah.
sorry, you made me too much to do.
Yeah. So this is always already occurring in each of us, in Dasein, right? This is the interesting part, right? So,
Sorry.
yes, please, it's no problem.
With the, how is this an ontic investigation?
Well, I mean, it's ontological, but it's ontic because ultimately it's going to be, only from Dasein is doing the inquiry, right? And yeah. On the way to the existential or the structures, whereas the existential itself become part of the, onto the everydayness that we get into. Let me just do a couple of other things about phenomena here. So you have three steps and this is in the text. I'm just synthesizing, or really actually explicating what's in the text. You have three notions of phenomena, right? You have the formal, the common, and the properly phenomenological. And the former is no everyday life, no ego. So this is the formal ontology, if you will, or a formal phenomenology, the elements of formal. Yeah. And you had disciplines in phenomenology, formal ontology, right? This is only purely descriptive, no everyday life, ego, right? Etc. No placement in the world. It's only operative in the transcendental, in this movement, right? And it's only descriptive, right? As a formalization, right? The common, right, is a non-thematic, yeah? Vague, right? We become perplexed or bewildered by the question of being, to go back to Heidegger's opening, Yeah, so this is where we are, the common, phenomenological, in the beginning here. He's going to speak about this. And then the properly, right? And this is also average everydayness.
He hates that.
He hates this, das Mann. This is prey to what is called the dictatorship of the they. This is where there's some politics involved, right? This is the mass man. The mass man, yeah, in a way. And is in the common phenomenological. No accident that he picks this word. The common phenomenological. And then the other one, so this is the transcendental subject, if you will, or the transcendent subject, who's performing the operations, if you will, on the descriptive to get back to the Ursprung, the originary, the two-step phenomenological. The common has no thematic, it's vague, it's average everydayness, right? And then, thought inauthentically. And this is where the violence begins. This is wrested from the phenomena. This is where you actually get to the matter itself. Very violent, wrested from phenomena. And Heidegger calls this the highest exertion of thinking. And he uses this kind of language, wrested and highest exertion of thinking. So you have these three levels, the one formal, the common, and the properly phenomenological as notions of phenomena. Right? This is the transcendent subject it appeals to, average everydayness or das Mann, and then the phenomenological, this is the highest exertion of thinking. This is going to lead us to the Dasein as the inquirer, right? It's going to lead us to the existential analytic. Okay, so transcendental phenomenology, again, is the movement from the singular, that's which is evident, self-evident, that's which seems, some of the things we went over, to the universal. Or one could also say from the particular to the universal. So you're going to be seeing this, and then, or the singular to the general, is probably better put, and then in terms of to the whole, to the totality, if you will, right? To a whole, right?
So are these like Hegelian-rooted concepts that he's developing? The
I'm
singular-
not so sure. No, these are terms that are used in the history of philosophy. So singularity is used in no, not necessarily, because the singularity here is well before. It's pre-ontological. It's pre-understanding. It's pre-scientific. All of these levels, right? I mean, I'm going to try to go somewhere here that will make maybe more sense in a second, right? So, the question is that this singular in particular. The reason it's not Hegelian, for Heidegger, it's called an existential. If you go back to the diagram I gave, the existential, on the that I mapped out the second day of class, I think it was. With care and attunement and, self-world and, yeah. You have that? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I have it here. I mean, I can, but you can see that there's something called the existentials. Let's see if I have it. Yeah. You have the existentialia, the existentials, right? And then you have the existentials, right? So Heidegger's going to distinguish the singulars are always in particular are always in the existentials, whereas the existentials are in the universal and the general. Right? So the existentials are what we are kind of like pre-scientific, pre-understanding to us. So think of you. I mean, listen. This may be a bad example, but I'll just try it. Just think of yourself as made up of all these existentials, right? As your singularity, right? These existentials, right? But you have no understanding of them, right? They lead, right, to a kind of, vagueness, common phenomena, right? You really cannot thematize anything. You're vague. You're, confused, bewildered. All these kind of categories, etc. Right? And then, in order to get to the universal and have some understanding to the existential, you begin to have to, work. You have to begin to rest, right? The phenomena and understand, right? Give it some kind of meaning, and you begin to engage in this high exertion of thinking. So existence becomes really basically what we're showing here are structures, right? So let's just take the so-called mental illness as an example. What are the existentials of a guy who blows away 26 people in a church or whatever, right? I mean, you have to think about what is really operative in that, in terms of this person's, what is manifest, what is appearing to them, right? Does it mean he was completely pre-understanding, et cetera, even though he can act, right? Is he completely embedded in a singularity? Is this a kind of case? Or in our everyday life, in our averageness in everyday life, are we always grounded just by these givens of everyday life, right? We live in this kind of constant ontic realm of modifications, change, whatever, but we're always receiving in this kind of like passive receptacles. All of this would be part of an existentialis. What are the characteristics of this, right, in a certain way? And maybe the little designs. We don't have any. Yep. So anyway, I mean, we'll talk more about this. It'll become clear as we get into the existential analytic, in a sense. What I really want to do here is that, Heidegger is going to move on from transcendental phenomenology. I mean, I'm not going to belabor this. I can go on, we can do a whole course just on transcendental phenomenology. Let me just put it this way. Heidegger is interested in doing philosophy, not knowing philosophy, right? This is really a big distinction in him. They're very different, right? And what is at stake, the matters themselves, is our everyday experience of world and how world worlds. This is really the stake. And this is what he contributes, if you will, to 20th century. Even though Lukács will talk about labor, right, class consciousness, reification, and all of these categories, which are all very, very important and very necessary to be engaged. Heidegger is really interested in every aspect of everyday experience, right? Every aspect, right? And academic philosophies, schooling, traditional philosophy, has really produced all these screens, right? If you want to think of this, before the world, if you want to, and layered this with all, and actually in some ways distorting what's happening, right? So in a way, the torsion, the use of verbs like resting, is a torsion, if you will, to create a new torso, of a new way of doing philosophy, not knowing it. Philosophy for him is not research. It's not scholarship or scholarship, as Marcuse used to call it, right? It is basically doing something experientially, and he's building all these levels of doing a structural analysis, if you will, and structural features, characteristics of how we exist in the world, both confused, right, in the common, non-thematic, vague, etc., into, how we may get back, and you'll begin to see categories like authenticity, what's proper to one's own. I put this word up here for properly phenomenological, for which one appropriates and which one owns. Proper eigen, mine own, right? You appropriate something, right? And I'm not trying to be, quote, individualistic here, but there are processes of individuation going on, obviously, in this, right? And anyway, and going back to transcendental phenomenology, in Husserl, the transcendental phenomenological was always consciousness of something. Again, as I mentioned to you before, Heidegger is not interested only in consciousness. He says, the problem is we don't interrogate the being, or we have an ontology of, if you will, of consciousness. So he is against the quote-unquote knowing subject. He's against, right, in some ways, epistemology, right, and whereas Husserl is not. So, okay? So, again, this book begins on a long detour. First of all, it raises the question, we have forgotten the question of being, right? We have lost the meaning of being. Right? What does it actually mean to be? Right? He'll give us things, and he will see this in the horizon of time. Everything is going to be written under the horizon of time. And he's going to say that, we first of all, the first detour we have to take, if you will, in order to get back on track, is through this understanding phenomenology first. Understanding its richness in terms of its descriptive capacity, its capacity to do a trace back to originative, moments, establish what were the conditions for the possibility for that which did appear, right? So one can write a history of techniques like a Stiegler, which is partially what he's doing in Technics and Civilization. He's going back, to look at these things in terms of their originative force. Right? There is a descriptive phenomenology going on. Well, I know we haven't read Technics in Time, but maybe I'll talk more about that. Technics in Time has very interesting sections on this. You've read some of
I
it?
read the second one, disorientation.
Yes.
I thought you did that and I wasn't here.
No, I may have mentioned it,
It'd be great if you
but
did.
disorientation is very much along these lines that we have the disorder. Although differently for Stiegler, it's an originary default that produced us, and not in Heidegger's case that we have forgotten the question of being. There's a very different, if you will, starting point, or the beginning. And the beginning is always the most difficult. Always the most difficult in any, yeah. So this is what he's looking for. So again, the key definition in phenomenology is intention. How does intentionality, is a behavior, a comportment, or a conduct come about? And his being is presupposed in the Husserlian phenomenology. He's making this question, he addresses this, it's presupposed, but he never gets to it, Husserl. So he's arguing with his teacher here. So the meaning is not in the things themselves, we're not getting the meaning, but in the way we speak and how we judge these things. So the meaning is never just a given, right? It's how we speak, right, and make judgments about them. And judgment in German is Urteil, which means literally to separate out. Very interesting, the judgment there. So again, the phenomenological method suspends the natural attitude, the way we naturally comport ourselves, etc., because for that kind of conditioning, if you will, has produced this vagueness, unthematized, lack of getting to the things themselves, right? And we need to get back to the description of the phenomena themselves without putting this on extraneous matter. No extraneous matter. What makes something something? So the little word is has a tremendous importance for Heidegger. What is something? Right? The isness of something, right? So Derrida will play on this. He'll write about Heidegger's hand. Because he hears the story that Heidegger said the Führer had such beautiful hands. Yeah. He said that in reply to someone about, when he said, in the Führer awful, he says, yes, but he has beautiful hands. So Derrida, phenomenologically, investigates, and then what could that really mean? What is the hand of Heidegger that writes? That, what does this hand have to do? And ultimately, what is a hand? Because a hand in German is also begriffen, is a grasping by the hand, is how you conceptualize it. Mm-hmm. So the hand is very, very important in that, in this sense, right? So again, Jameson, by the way, I thought always did a very good thing of saying that Husserl's great contribution in the 19th century and early 20th century is he did not flinch before the phenomena, right? He kept studying the phenomena. He would not flinch and turn his head the other way. He always went back to the matter themselves, right? So you want to dislodge, again, phenomena appearance, right? Because it is, when you talk appearance, it becomes an object of consciousness. This is what Heidegger is critiquing. He does not want the object of consciousness. He wants it the way it really is. So he's much more violent than his predecessor and teacher, Husserl, who doesn't flinch. So you can imagine what's going on. I mean, what they really want to get to here, right? So the linkage, again, there's a causal, going back to your question about the thing in itself, there's a causal link between the phenomena and the nouement. This is part of the problem from him. The thing in itself is the mysterious cause of what we see, but we can only experience it through consciousness, that is through, in Kant's critique, categories of understanding, the forms of intuition, and time and space. And this is a construction of the critique of pure reason, right? That he's going to go with this in this sense. Right. So, Again, the phanestai is to bring something to light that which shows itself as itself. So maybe you understand that what he's trying to get away from is any kind of linear causality, right? That there's this mysterious cause behind something, right? Or a cause and effect linear relationship. And he's looking like Marx in some ways, and even though it's a different language, at multiple levels of determinations, right? There's a multiplicity of determinations in any object of investigation, right? And then we can get to it, right? So very much like Marx, this method is, going to, and it's not about consciousness, it's about the matter itself. Getting to the heart of the matter itself. So, okay, so let's go back. So this phenomenology, the transcendental phenomenology, is one aspect of the method, right? We're dealing with the concept of phenomena. Now we have to deal with the logos. What is logos, right? And again, Heidegger at his best. I mean, I think this is always very relevant. So if you look at, and he goes through the vulgar concept of phenomena before we get to page 30, the three different elements, the formal, the common, and the properly phenomenological. These are the elements that constitute the phenomena itself, the phenomena, right? Yeah. If you look at page 29, this is a very good paragraph, maybe help clarify a little bit. Phenomena, the self showing in itself, the third paragraph down, or second full paragraph, means a distinctive way something can be encountered. On the one hand, appearance means a referential relation in beings themselves, such that what does the referent, the announcing, can fulfill its possible function only if it shows itself in itself, only if it is a phenomena. Both appearance and semblance are always found in the phenomena, albeit in different ways. The confusing multiplicity of phenomena designated by the terms phenomena, semblance, appearance, and mere appearance can be unraveled only if the concept of phenomena is understood from the very beginning as the self showing in itself. Got to begin there. The self showing in itself. And he goes through then the elements more so. Okay, let's go on to the concept of logos. I mean, like I said, this kind of philosophy demands multiple readings. I hate to say it, but this is what keeps the business going. It still hasn't been realized in the world, so I guess it still has a raison d'etre, right? Okay, so the concept of logos. Page 30, I think 32 for you're on, okay. The concept of logos many meanings in Plato and Aristotle, indeed in such a way that these meanings diverge without a basic meaning positively taking the lead. So you can see, first of all, he's announcing to us, I know all the definitions that Plato and Aristotle use. I've traced this word logos throughout. This is in fact only an illusion, which lasts so long as an interpretation is not able to grasp adequately the basic meaning in its primary content. If we say that the basic meaning of logos, and this is how we usually do it, is discourse, rede, this literal translation becomes valid only when we define what discourse means. The latter history of the word logos, and especially the manifold and arbitrary interpretations of subsequent philosophy, constantly conceive the authentic meaning of discourse, which is manifest enough. Logos is translated, and that means interpreted as reason, judgment, concept, definition, ground, relation. So you could have answered Stanley today, are you asking me about logos and as definition or as concept, judgment, etc., right? Anyway, these are little games that philosophers can play sometimes if need be, right? But how can discourse be so susceptible of modification that logos means all the things mentioned, and indeed in scholarly usage? Even if logos is understood in the sense of a statement, making a statement, and statement as judgment, this apparently correct translation can miss the fundamental meaning, especially if judgment is understood in the sense of some contemporary theory of judgment. Logos does not mean judgment, in any case not primarily, if by judgment we understand connecting two things or taking a position by endorsing or rejecting. Making a judgment, right? Taking a position or connecting up things. Rather, logos as discourse really means dialogue, to make manifest about what is talked about in discourse. Aristotle explicates this function of discourse most precisely as apophanastai. Logos lets something be seen, phanastai, namely what is being talked about, and indeed for the speaker who serves as the medium. The speaker is not doing, just as the medium. Or for those who speak with each other, discourse lets us see, apo, from itself, what is being talked about. In discourse, apophansis, insofar as is genuine, what is said should be derived from what is being talked about. In this way, spoken communication and what it says makes manifest what it is talking about, and thus makes accessible to another. Such is the structure, and this is interesting, of logos as apophansis, right? So media studies as apophansis in the ancient Greeks, right? About spoken communication, right? And how we speak. Not every discourse suits this mode of making manifest in the sense of letting something be seen by indicating it. For example, requesting, echi, also makes something manifest but in a different way. When fully concrete, discourse letting something be seen has the character of speaking of vocalization in words, right? Indeed, and I won't go on with the Greek so much, but anyway, the metaphanatasias, vocalization in which something is always cited. Or only because the function of logos, as apophansis, lies in letting something be seen by indicating it, can logos have the structure of synthesis. This is how synthesis comes about. And this is interesting, right? I mean, you use the word we synthesize, the whole Hegelian Marxist tradition, and one variant of it was always talk about dialectic as thesis, antithesis, synthesis as this triad. So here we go with what does synthesis really mean, right? What does it mean to synthesize? Here, synthesis does not mean to connect and conjoin representations, to manipulate cyclical occurrences, which then gives rise to the problem of how these connections as internal correspond to what is external and physical. The soon here has a purely aphantatical meaning, to let something be seen in its togetherness. To let something be seen in its togetherness with something, to let something be seen as something. Very interesting, huh? Synthesis literally means to come together. And coming together. Furthermore, because logos lets something be seen, it can therefore be true or false. But everything depends on staying clear of any concept of truth construed in the sense of correspondence or accordance. And he has a very beautiful essay on the essence of truth, which I recommend you read, because he dismantles the correspondence theory of truth. It's a very beautiful essay in terms of, using aletheia against the correspondence of truth, the theory of truth. This idea is by no means the primary one in the concept of, and he uses the word now, aletheia. The being true of logos, as aletheinen, means to take beings that are being talked about in legen, as apophanastai, out of their concealment. That's what aletheia means, to talk about beings as they come out of the concealment, right? To let them be seen as something unconcealed, to discover them. Similarly, being false is tantamount to deceiving in the sense of covering up. putting something in front of something else by way of not letting it be seen and therefore passing it off as something it is not. Okay? But because truth has this meaning, and because logos is a specific mode of letting something be seen, logos simply may not be appealed to as the primary place of truth. If one defines truth that which genuinely pertains to judgment, which is quite customary today, and if one evokes Aristotle in support of this thesis, such a procedure is without justification, and the Greek concept of truth thoroughly misunderstood. In the Greek sense, what is true, indeed more originally true than the logos we have been discussing, is aesthesis, the simple sense perception of something. This is from what the word aesthetics comes from. So for those of you that think the primary is the aesthetic, you're in good company here with Heidegger, right? Yep. To the extent that aesthesis aims at its idea, that is, the beings which are generally accessible only through it and for it. For example, looking at colors, perception is always true. This means that looking always discovers colors. Hearing always discovers tones. What is in the purest and most original sense true, that is, what only discovers in such a way that it can never cover up anything, is pure noein, straightforwardly observant apprehension of the simple determination of beings as such. This noein can never cover up, can never be false. At worst, it can only be non-apprehending, agethin, not sufficing for straightforward, appropriate access. What no longer takes the form of a pure letting be seen, but rather in its indicating always has recourse to something else. So he's breaking up this theory of referential and outside relational to something. It's a non-relational structure here that he's dealing with. Acquires with this the structure of synthesis, the power of covering up. However, so when, Foucault, for example, this gives you an idea of how much they're indebted and also how dense this really can be. When Foucault, in Order of Things, talks about synthesis, right, and the grounds of synthesis, he's taking a lot of this from Heidegger. What is the possibility and the ground of our synthetic activity? Is it always right? Is it based on judgment? Is it based on the phenomena? Is it combination? So this is something that he throws into question. More so in Archaeology of Knowledge, which is a more theoretical, discursive text. Words and things is a different animal, but he mentions it there too. All right, so anyway, it's a multiply-founded phenomenon of truth. Realism and idealism alike thoroughly miss the approach to the Greek concept of truth. Do we name from the outside the table? Once we touch it, we know it, we have a consciousness of an object. Does it come to us from without, right? Or do we already have a pre-existent idea of it? This is an old problem in the history of philosophy. How do we come to the objects themselves? Is it through ideation, right? Is it going on in consciousness? Or is it an extraneous thing that strikes us, etc.? Heidegger's going to try to go a different way with the Greek concept of truth, right? That realism and idealism may be based on false, premises or really judgments of synthetic activity, right? Realism and alike miss the meaning of the Greek concept of truth, from which alone the possibility of something like a theory of ideas, and that's Plato. That's the referent there, as to Plato's theory of ideas, can be understood as philosophical knowledge. And because the function of logos lies in letting something be seen straightforward and letting beings be apprehended, logos can mean reason. So he's given you multiple definitions of logos. Furthermore, because logos is used in the sense not only in legan, but also in legomenon, which is pointed to as such, and because the latter is nothing other than the eupokemion, which is already lying, the eukokemion always lies present at the basis of all relevant speech and discussion. Logos, qua legomenon, means ground, means ratio. Finally, because logos, as legotheon, can also mean what is addressed. So he's going through here, obviously, methodologically, all these Greek terms, breaking them up, right? And showing, again, the difficulty of logos and how it's been interpreted, both as reason, giving a reason of something, how we get the disciplines, the logies, all of the logies that we use in English, how it can become ratio, right? Right? It also can be mean what is addressed, something that's visible in its relationship to something else in its relationship, and it acquires the meaning of relation and relationship. So you have many, many levels here, right? Well, how something's apprehended, how something is spoken of in speech, how something is grounded in reason. Also, what is the ratio, the ground of something, right? And then the meaning of relation and relation. So the interpretation of apophantic speech may suffice to, to clarify the primary function of logos. So the preliminary concept of phenomenology. I want to just say this. He's going to go two ways here. He's going to use a model, if you will, transcendental phenomenology, right, which is the way of seeing, but hermeneutical ontology, which is the way of hearing. So he's got two different things going on here in terms of our senses. Right? I want to point that out. I think this is an important thing to keep in mind in a very basic sense, methodologically. One is through sight, seeing the phenomena, right? That which appears and is manifest, etc. But also the hearing of that, of which the hermeneutics gives either the meaning or is the interpretation.
What is apophantic?
Well, he talks about that earlier, right? Didn't I read that the definition right earlier?
Like to show.
Yes.
To
Yeah.
known.
Yes.
Yeah, show
Right.
and let be seen.
Yes.
Letting something in.
What page?
I'm trying to see.
Bottom of 30, top of 30.
Yeah, top of 30 and 31. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. No, it's good. Good. Yeah. At least the voice has stopped. Now we have what Adorno hated as elementary jazz, whatever that is, right?
Wait, transcendental phenomenology versus hermeneutical.
I'm not saying versus. It's and. It's both and in terms of the method. The transcendental phenomenology gives us access to the description of the phenomena, right, etc. We're going to try to get a pure phenomenological moment where we rest phenomena by seeing, right? Seeing the phenomena, tracing back, which is on the other page here, I think on this page, to trace back to the Ursprung, etc. But the hermeneutical ontology is the interpretive moment, which is taking place through the hearing. So I like the saying, hearing with one eyes. You have eyes that hear, or you hear, with your eye. This is a nice combination of what's really going on here methodologically. You're struck, right, by the vision, but also the tympanizing, the hammer and the anvil, the ear is being, shaken, right? Yeah, please. Yeah.
It's interesting, in common usage, hearing is much more common than seeing. Like, I hear this, or...
I hear you, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see.
I see.
I see all the time.
Okay. But in terms of general knowledge, have you heard this, or what is everyone hearing about so-and-so?
For Heidegger, this is not. I understand the commonplaces in all of this. For Heidegger, these kind of sayings, I hear you, unless, he's understanding the vernacular there, or he's not going to really take to that. Or when people say, I see, this for him is average everydayness.
Yeah.
Again, the scene, right, I'm sorry. You hear what? You can hear Das Mann, you hear. But anyway, yeah. It is severe. It is severe. No question about it. But
Safe spaces? No safe
interest.
spaces?
There's no safe space in Heidegger. No. But we're good friends now. The safe space one.
Oh, great.
Yeah. She says, I see your point, Michael. Yeah.
I see your
see.
point.
That's what she said. She's average every day. This. Anybody that uses safe space with me is yeah. Right.
I grasp your point.
Yes,
I grasp.
indeed.
Yeah.
But the thing is to try to connect the method, right? That we're going through both descriptions of structures, right? Descriptives of structures, of being and beings, right? We're going to proceed now into the existential analytic, which is very important to keep in mind, that we're going to begin the inquiry through Dasein, who are us, right? And at the same time, there's this meaning that is being given, right? Through understanding, explication, all the terms I gave you about hermeneutics, right? And in terms of, you're always in this position of interpretation. And that's the title of, Jameson's first 90 pages. It's on interpretation, of the political unconscious. It's worth reading alongside of this because it gives you a sense of how, one of the leading Marxist academics, uses something like this in today's, research and way of going about an investigation, especially into literature, which is his field. Yeah. So, anyway, let me go on. So on page 34, I'm going to just skip around a little bit. The preliminary concept of phenomenology, maybe bottom of page 33. Phenomenology is the way of access to and the demonstrative matter of determination of that which is to become the theme of ontology. Okay? This is very, very important. Ontology is possible only as phenomenology. The phenomenological concept of phenomena as self-showing, once again, right, means the being of beings, its meaning, modifications, and derivatives. The self-showing is nothing arbitrary, nor is it something like an appearing. The being of beings can least of all be something behind which something else stands, something that does not appear. So this is not something about being behind something, right? Again, it's that which is emerging. Remember this German word Ursprung, again, that which emerges, that which is an event, that which is something of a happening, right? So it's very active, right? And this is trace. Essentially, nothing stands behind the phenomena, page 34 of phenomenology. Nevertheless, what is to become a phenomena can be concealed. And it's precisely because phenomena are initially, and for the most part, not given the phenomenology is needed. That phenomenology, being covered up, is the counter concept to phenomena. This is interesting, the notion of the cover-up, right? And what we go through every day in media, what we go every day through the political news, etc., right? We're not getting phenomena, right? At all, right? And when you think of some of the language of the counter, you have counterpunch, you have, the Real News, Baltimore, you have the Intercept, right? Think about these words, these names of these others that, are looking at, quote, the cover-up, right? But do they really address the phenomena, or are they simple opposition? This is a question we could ask. Vis-a-vis Heidegger. That's all I'm saying. Something interesting. So there are a variety of ways that phenomena can be covered up. In the first place, and he'll give you these ways, right? Phenomena can be in the sense that it is still completely undiscovered. Well, I didn't know there was the Paradise paper, whatever those things are. Those, the laundering of assets by Apple. I had no idea Apple was a bank, right? Yeah. Anyway, I knew of. Anyway, but it's good that we have this out there now. It was undiscovered until there's neither knowledge nor lack of knowledge about it, right? Moreover, phenomena can be submerged. right? This means it was once discovered, but then it got covered up again. Now Richard Nixon's a leftist, compared to today, yeah, right? This covering up can be total, but more commonly, what was once discovered may still be visible, though only as a semblance. So I think in this case of the 18th Brumaire of Marx, which I think is one of Marx's greatest pieces of writing, the first things appear as tragedy, the second, Hegel forgot to tell us the second time as farce. And now that's pastiche, and who knows what else we're going to come up with as a new term. However, when there is a semblance, there is being. Okay, so this is interesting. There's being of Napoleon Le Petit in the 18th Brumaire. And his shrewdness of, making a deal with the homeless, or the people of the rabble, right? Yeah. He it was very interesting the way they mobilized the rabble,
Yeah, the lumpen, what do you call them, or would Marx call them? Or
the lumpen.
Lumpen.
The lumpen proletariat, yeah, the lumpen, yeah, yeah.
The ragpickers.
I had a friend who named his car the lumpen. Right. It's crazy, yeah. A Volkswagen too. People's wagon named the lumpen, right? However, when there is semblance, there is being. The covering up as dissimulation. So you see these terms that are used even today, art world especially, they love this term dissimulation, simulacra, these are all kind of like currency concepts, in terms of the culture, right? Is the most frequent and the most dangerous kind, because here the possibilities of being deceived and misled are especially pernicious. Within a system, the structures and concepts of being that are available, but concealed with respect to the autonomy, may perhaps claim their rights on the basis of their integrated structure in a system. They present themselves as something clear, which is in no need of further justification, and serve as a point of departure for a process of deduction. So he's criticizing all the scholarship of his day. How do anthropologists work? How do sociologists work, right? Etc. And maybe even the scientific. The covering up itself, whether it can be understood in the sense of concealment, being submerged or disguised, has in turn a twofold possibility. There are accidental coverings and necessary ones, the latter grounded in the enduring nature of the discovered. It is possible for every phenomenological concept and proposition drawn from genuine origins to degenerate when communicated as a statement. It gets circulated in a vacuous fashion, loses its autonomy, and becomes a free-floating thesis. Very interesting, right? This is what happens when the sense of concealment and submersion is taking place. Very much how the media works in many ways, you really think about this. Even in the concrete work itself, there lurks the possibility of a calcification and of the inability to grasp what was originally grasped. And the difficulty of this research consists precisely in making it self-critical in a positive sense. The way of encountering being and the structures of being in the motor phenomena must first be wrested from the objects of phenomenology. Thus, the point of departure of the analysis, the access to the phenomena, and the passage through the prevalent coverings must secure their own method. The idea of an originary and intuitive grasp and explication of phenomena must be opposed to the naivete of an accidental, immediate, and unreflective beholding. Okay, so we're going to use these concepts: originary, again, the Ursprung, the intuitive, the Wesenschauen, right, and the explication, the phenomena, opposed to accidental, immediate. Remember, Marcuse began with the immediate reflection in Hegel in the piece on dialectics today, and unreflective beholding, which is the whole culture right now. I mean, you right here, 3 words. You have, it's always an accident, You know, there's nothing, no relationship to the world, right? Yeah. It's always immediate, right? Gratification or, texting, Snapchatting or whatever you do, all this kind of stuff. The texting
Twitter.
culture, the Twitter culture, etc. And then the unreflective beholding, it's awesome. Every other word. Awesome.
Oh,
Awesome.
awesome.
I'm waiting for the sum of the awe. But anyway, I'm still looking.
Shocking.
But shocking awe, shocking awesome. Yeah. So on the basis, so he's describing here, I think, structures of, that he's going to engage of being. Remember, he's doing preliminary here. We've only done 34, 35 pages, right? This is really setting the stage, if you will, right? Through method, through what the investigation is going to be about, right? Yeah.
You know how
Yeah, please.
in like political science or sociology papers they have the abstract, and the sort of the way you're supposed to write is you got to give the argument like in the beginning of the book in like
Yes.
2 paragraphs, and then it's like the total opposite rejection of that. Like the arguments are going to be like on page.
That's true too,
400.
and also you have to remember on this level of philosophy, it's not the argument, it's the argumentum.
Right.
Historically, how
what
what moment of argumentation, what method are you using, and to whom are you using? It's not only deductive, inductive, it's many, many other levels.
The argument is just a free-floating thesis in sociology.
Right. That's right. Basically, that's what happens.
It's my argument.
Free-floating thesis. It's my argument in this paper that such and such will happen. Right? You see this written all the time. Yeah, it's my claim. like we're in the gold rush, making a claim. Right. Okay. So let's go on. So on the basis of the preliminary concept of phenomenology, limit the time phenomenal and phenomenological can be given fixed meanings, right? What is given and is explicable in the way, we had to go 8 pages just to get to the meaning, right? What is given and explicable in the way we would encounter the phenomenon is called phenomenal. So the givens, is phenomenal. In this sense, we speak of phenomenal structures. Everything that belongs to the manner of indication and explication and that constitutes the conceptuality this research requires is called phenomenology. With your friend Derrida, I like him very much too, I'm just, anyway. When he writes the book Voice and Phenomena, La Voix et les Phénomènes, he's actually taken a lot of the point of departure here on the difference between indicative and expressive signs, which is a reading of the 6th investigation of Husserl in the logical investigations, and it's called phenomenological. Right? Yeah.
That's what he told me yesterday. Yeah.
He did. I told you that in a dream. You had a good dream. Yeah. Had a conversation. Huh? You had a ghostly demarcation. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Good.
But he's also dealing with voice and text.
Yes. No, that's very
He's
true.
also
No, I'm just
taking
saying
on-
that here is really about the indicative sign. Derrida collapses that an indicative sign, you don't really need expressive signs, that they're one and the same. They'll take signs, that Husserl distinguishes between the indicative and the, and the expressive, right? And he collapses it into only the indicative. I think he's getting this from Heidegger. That's all I'm pointing to. That there is a kind of element of the thesis here.
He's also questioning Heidegger's privileging of the voice.
That's a hard. Let's hold that question for a while. Yeah, I mean it's a good question. Yeah. The voice that remains silent. I think that's the last chapter of the book. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Because phenomena is the phenomenological understanding is always just what constitutes being, and furthermore, because being is always the being of beings. We must first of all bring beings themselves forward in the right way, right? That means that we're going to be standing in a certain kind of, comportment, etc. If we are to have any prospect of exposing being, these beings must likewise show themselves in the way of access that genuinely belongs to them. Thus, the vulgar concept of phenomena becomes phenomenal relevant. The preliminary task of phenomenologically securing that being, which is to serve as our example, as the point of departure for the analysis proper, is always already prescribed by the goal of this analysis. As far as content goes, phenomenology is the science of the being of beings, ontology. In our elucidation of the task of ontology, the necessity arose for a fundamental ontology, which should have as its theme that being which is ontologically and ontically distinctive, namely Dasein. This may be done in such a way that our ontology confronts the cardinal problem, which is that of the question of the meaning of being in general, the cardinal problem. From the investigation itself, we see that the methodological meaning of phenomenological description is interpretation, and here comes the hermeneutics. The logos of the phenomenological design has the character of epithemine, through which the proper meaning of being and the basic structures of the very being of design are made known to the understanding of being that belongs to Dasein itself. The phenomenology of Dasein, not transcendental phenomenology, but the phenomenology of design, is hermeneutics in the original signification of that word, which designates, and this is crucial, not just interpretation, but the work of interpretation, right? And why I gave you multiple meanings of it, and I'm sure we can find more, right? And think about this too. But since the discovery of the meaning of being and the basic structures of design in general exhibits the horizon for every further ontological research into beings unlike design, the present hermeneutic is at the same time hermeneutics in the sense that it works out the possibility, or the conditions of the possibility, of every ontological investigation. Finally, insofar as Dasein has ontological priority over all other beings, as a being in the possibility of existence, hermeneutics, as the interpretation of the being of Dasein, receives the third, specific and philosophically understood primary meaning of an analysis of the existentiality of existence. What are these structures that make us really exist? What does this ultimately mean? To the extent that this hermeneutic elaborates the historicity of Dasein ontologically as the ontic condition for the possibility of the discipline of history. This is different than Marx. We only know of one science, the science of history. For Heidegger, you're already presupposing the historicity of that. You have subjectivity before history, if you will, subject. Right? Okay, so we'll go back to this. If you want to mark this section, or if you're interested in this question, it's certainly something that's worth returning to as we get into this notion of history. I feel the same way, Chris. Yeah, I wouldn't have worn a sweater, I don't know. Anyway.
Can you turn on the AC over there, Arto?
Yeah, turn on the AC. Impecca.
I mean, the kids are gone.
Impeccable.
Oh, is it quiet out there?
Yeah, it's not so bad.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
Yeah, you can open the door.
Yeah.
64 degrees. That's
Beautiful.
Too bad. It's
Beautiful.
not too bad.
No, it's okay.
No, 64 is good for right now. Maybe go up to 70. Huh? Yeah?
So just a silly little question.
Yes.
Phenomenal is equivalent to the optic, and phenomenological
No.
is no?
No. The phenomenal is just what appears. It's at the base, right? Yeah. They're not equivocations going on
It's
here.
like we're in a factory.
He's actually, yeah,
It's
it's
like we're in a
good.
factory.
He's a
Yeah,
different.
we're in the factory. Yeah, the idea factory. Yeah.
I think that's going to interfere with recording, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
It's a trade-off. But
It's going to
Trade-off.
interfere with the recording.
with the
Should we
door
take
open,
Well,
like 5
they-
minutes of...
Higher than actuality lies possibility. I'll say that. Right, okay. I'm just going to go through the next 2 or 3 pages and then make a move to the Dasein for a little bit, and then we'll pick up next week on the, another whole section. I want to get through another, I think I want to do at least, we were supposed to do up to 53 today. We should go all the way through worldliness. We should go through the all the way through page up until 62 next week, or 61.
11 through 13?
Yeah.
9 through 13.
Yeah, 9 through 13. The analytic, but we're supposed to do the analytic of design today, right?
So for
But I mean,
next
if you're,
week,
yeah,
60 up to
yeah,
60.
up to 60, yeah, to page 62, I think it is, sections 9 through 13. Yeah, but let me just say here, again, ontology and phenomenology. He goes through the transcendence, right? Being in its structure, page 36, transcend every being and every possible existent determination of being. Being is the transcendent, pure and simple, where I began today with the transcendental phenomenology. The transcendence of the being of design is distinctive one, since it lies in the possibility and the necessity of the most radical individuation. The most radical individuation. Every disclosure of being as the transcendence is a transcendental knowledge. Right? Phenomenological truth is transcendental truth. Okay? Ontology and phenomenology are not two different disciplines, which among others belong to philosophy. Both terms characterize philosophy itself. So for Heidegger, philosophy is no longer, quote, just metaphysics, epistemology, the organon, logic, aesthetics, but fundamentally doing philosophy is phenomenology and ontology, object and procedure. The object of philosophy, the ontological being. The procedure, phenomenological and hermeneutical ontology, right? Okay? Philosophy is universal, phenomenological ontology, taking its point of departure, and this is where we're going to be at. The point of departure is the hermeneutic of Dasein, which is an analysis of existence, has fastened the end of the guideline of all philosophical inquiry at the point from which it arises and to which it returns. This is an important paragraph because it is going to discuss what philosophy is to...
What page?
This is page 36, I'm sorry. Beginning the paragraph Ontology and Phenomenology. Section 7. The following investigations, he pays homage to Husserl. Damn, stupid spoiled Upper West Side kids.
It's decent.
What's that? You know the little girl, she's spoiled with Upper West Side, Brian? Yeah, okay. I'm glad my phenomenological abilities are with me.
That's like the Marxism comes out, the class struggle.
Yeah, class struggle. Class struggles are beneath all of this.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, he goes on, right, we can understand phenomenology solely by seizing upon it as a possibility. And this is Husserl, to whom he dedicated the book, then withheld the dedication, when he became rector, he had all kinds of problems again with the teacher. Right. With regard to the awkwardness and the inelegance of the expression in the following analysis, I'm sorry I was a little bit inelegant here in my writing. We may remark it is one thing to report narratively, and remember I began and I got a little bit of flack from that from a person working on a rent about 3 or 4 weeks ago when I said the storytellers are going to be kicked out of the Republic, remember that? Because Heidegger, the Eleatic stranger, in terms of narrative, this is not philosophy, right? This narrative, right? About beings and another to grasp beings and their being, the latter task, not only are the most of words lacking, but above all, the grammar is lacking, right? If we may allude to earlier and in their own right altogether incomparable researches on the analysis of being, then we should compare the ontological sections of Plato's Parmenides or the 4th chapter of the 7th book of Aristotle's Metaphysics with a narrative passage from Thucydides. Then we can see the stunning character of the formulations with which their philosophers challenged the Greeks, right? Yeah. Since our powers are essentially inferior. Yeah, they were Sun Ra, this Greek world for about 150 years anyway. And also since the area being to be disclosed ontologically is far more difficult than that presented to the Greeks, because all these layers have to be delayered, right, in order to get back to them. The complexity of our concept formation and the severity of our expression will increase, right? So it kind of begins there. I know I did the outline of the treatise, 3 weeks ago, about how time and being, number 3, if you want to look again, and just to remind you, time and being was fleshed out in 1962 in a lecture called Time and Being. And then the doctrine of the schematism and of time, 1929, and the problem of temporality in Kant and the problem of metaphysics. The cogito sum and the incorporation of medieval ontology in the problem of the thinking thing was taken up in a piece called The Age of the World View on Descartes. And then Aristotle's treatise on time is later in the basic problems, ground problems of phenomenology, also from 1927. Remember, this is being written as a book for the job, a systematic treatise to get the job, when he was teaching, right? And he's also giving a course on the ground problems of phenomenology, where we began, right? Remember the basic problems.
Right.
The positive destruction of the entire tradition. And, he doesn't use it, he uses Abbau also in the German. Husserl, Marx, I think, is the first to use deconstruction, Abbau, to unbuild, is where the term comes from, and deconstruire in French. But anyway, Marx uses it, I think, in the Grundrisse for the first time, uses Abbau, deconstruction. Then Husserl is using it multiple times, and then Heidegger uses it too in the methodological treatise, the basic problems, ground problems of phenomenology. So remember, this whole thing, phenomenology, is a movement. It is not a dogma. It is not a fixed sense. It is always, the method is secondary, right, to the thing itself. It's not you're not pre-methodological when you look at the object world. You're looking at the object world, the matters themselves, the things themselves, first, right? And then through this bracketing, and suspension of the natural attitude, and then you begin to build the kind of method around it, right? Yeah. Descriptively, and then ultimately, in Heidegger's case, with the hermeneutical ontology. Yes. What?
Would it be called pre-ontological?
What would be called? You mean the phenomenological, the phenomena itself?
Yeah.
Did it mean the
You
things
said it's
themselves?
not there.
Well, it's pre-ontological because you haven't thematized it. You're still in this vague moment of the common, right? And you still haven't given it a thematization. This is why he needs Dasein. He needs us, and das, us and das Man, Dasein and das Man. He needs, right? In some ways. And by the way, I learned. I think this is in your book too. That Hannah Arendt first met him at his lectures on the Sophist. 1924. She was in the winter course with him in Marburg, and on the Sophist. And the Sophist, as you know, the epigraph is from the Sophist, for we have manifestly forgotten the question of being. So this is an earlier lecture. So you begin to see, the more you get into Heidegger, or the more you look at him, whatever, you begin to see that a lot of the coursework begins to play itself out. But this is the only systematic treatise we have which is unfinished. The rest are mostly lectures given or class, courses in which he's teaching. And I think the Derrida, they would publish the books, but I think the Derrida, particularly after the publication of De la Grammatologie, in his first little book publications, that he was also in the mode of teaching, and all the lectures became, similarly in many ways. He would make interventions, write something, but in general it was the teaching, like Giving Time was a series of lectures. His work Dissemination, some of those essays were given,
Margins.
Margins of Philosophy were given as lectures, and also from courses, right? Yeah, yeah. But that's only up to the 70s. I'm talking about when he does the double take and then he becomes much more involved in institutional practices. I mean, Derrida has multiple moments. One is as the militant, up until Glas, 1974-75. That's a reading of Hegel and Genet. You want dialectics?
I've looked at Glas.
It's crazy, huh? Yeah? Yeah.
It's got the name is appropriate, Glas.
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 GLA.
The bell, for whom the bell tolls. It's a risk between the absolute knowledge of the Hegelian system and Jean Genet, who was totally anti-philosophical, and the writing of Genet. And it's based on conversations that Derrida had with Genet. They became very good friends in the 70s. Genet did not write much during the 70s. So Derrida goes back to Our Lady of the Flowers and shows how that language upsets phenomenologically Hegel's system of absolute knowing. And also that Genet is educated by public assistance. He has no formal, he's an orphan. It's a bastard child, right? And how the bastard child can upset this, monolithic system of knowing, this progression. Anyway, it's interesting. I don't recommend, struggling. So I'd rather you do Arno Schmidt. He's not translated though. He would write in 3 columns. One for the dominant commonplace, right? 2, oppositionally to the dominant commonplace, and then to subvert both. The Nazi language, oppositional, and then to subvert both. Right? Quite the character.
Double session is hard enough.
Double session's very difficult too. Yeah, always a double reading. But keep that in mind here too. There's always this double going on. In this Dasein as the interpreter. It's not so straightforward. We're so accustomed in the United States for this ABC kind of thinking, this kind of positivism that pervades the educational system. Yeah, there's always, yeah. So the next step will be to look at the design analytic, right? We're gonna engage with that. I mean, I hope the step backs are very important. The stepping beyond and the step back. One is to step back from foundational ontology to fundamental ontology. And you remember the foundation from one condition of possibility to another, right? Again, let me just mention one other thing about this seeing and hearing. Seeing is about ideation. How do we ideate, right? And this is what transcendental phenomenology is really about. Husserl writes a book, Ideas, for pure phenomenology, 2 volumes, right? And he's writing about how one comes to this, and he performs what's called the epoche, which is a suspension of our natural ways of seeing, our natural attitude, our comportment towards things. It's a radical shift in perspective, in order to get closer to the things themselves. He thinks we've been screened, we've been so much, colored by academic overlay, certain ways of, seeing. He wants to undo that and get to phenomena much more closely, right? Through this suspension. So the ideation is going on in the transcendental phenomenology. The other part of the method, this phenomenological ontology, the hermeneutical, is to understand what one hears, right? Based on the hearing. You can really listen to a message, right? You can really listen to a message. So it really is, on the one hand, the art of seeing to play on, Aldous Huxley. On the other, the art of hearing. Right? These two arts are very much present in the Heideggerian methodological thing. So the starting point, again, is not the transcendental ego, right? It's doing the description, but facticity or factual existence, the actual Dasein in its everydayness. And the ear, again, the hearing, is attuned to time. So the hearing and time is a relationship we'll talk more about in terms of temporality, historicity, right? So, yeah. So the double step, and again, The foundational ontology, and we went over this a little earlier in the introduction on the framing of the disciplines, makes the sciences possible, the regionals, the biologies, the physics, all of these things, whereas the fundamental ontology makes actually the foundational sciences possible. Okay? So Heidegger is really talking about a whole new direction, against foundationalism and the foundation. We must go back to this fundamental ontology in order to really build the disciplines properly. Yeah? This is what he's saying. Yeah? Right? So the one is, and foundational ontology is metaphysical. We have not overcome metaphysics because we have not overcome foundational ontology. We have not overcome the foundations. We've shaken them a little bit, right? But we haven't really overcome totally, in a sense. And the second is phenomenological, because you have modes, right, of understanding. This is always going on. The understanding is happening in the fundamental ontology. Right? So one other thing about the stepping back, right? The stepping back, in some ways, taking the step back, is also a retreat to an original condition of possibility. And I was reminded when rereading this of Nietzsche in Thus Proth Zarathustra, the section on the convalescent. The purpose of convalescing, right, is that you fold back into yourself. Right? You're folding back into your true self. The convalescent, in terms of the healing, is getting back to your original condition of what your possibilities were. And Nietzsche has a very good section of this in Zarathustra on the convalescent. So I was reminded of that. I thought it was kind of interesting. Right? In a way. So stepping beyond is always surpassing. Right? The transcendental step beyond is always surpassing. Right, and it's understood as a happening, right, and it stretches from something to something, right. You're kind of out there. I mean, this kind of ecstasis, standing out, right, standing beyond, right, in which you're going to stand towards something, and you're moving towards the transcendent in that case, right. Right. So everyday existence, where we'll begin next time, will be with Dasein, the existential analytic. And with all due respect to Marcuse, the more I read of this, I don't think he exceeds the existential analytic in terms of his work. He claims that existentialism, not that Sartre is, the only person that takes this up as existentialism, but Marcuse criticizes Heidegger for staying in a kind of subjectivity, right? Or the existential analytic, but more so Sartre in this way. But that's good what you brought up today about Sartre.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was. It was very good. Yeah. Stanley didn't like it when I said the first 60 pages of Being and Nothingness was devoted to the principle of negation. Yeah. He tried to get out of that one. I was laughing. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. The whole first chapter of the Being and Nothingness is on the principle of negation. And the dialectical movement presupposes Spinoza's famous saying in modernity: "Omnis determinatio est negatio." All determination is negation. That's how we move, right? It's through negation. That's the dialectical movement. That's why the category is so crucial. So anyway, it has a long history. All right, so on the chart, I mean, again, we're kind of now in the Dasein, with world and self, right? We'll do language and speech, project, circumspection. We'll be talking about objects ready and present to hand. And we'll keep going forward. But I suggest, with a little outline as well as the diagram, that will help the reading. I hope so. I mean, that's the intention, that I put on the board. And, So, all right.
So we should go through 62, you said? Is that what you said?
Yeah, section 9 through 13. Yeah, we'll begin with the existential analytic. We'll introduce our respective Daseins, right? And interpret from there, right? Yeah. Let me just say one more thing about foundational. I was just reminded of something here in some of my notes. Foundational is a genealogy of being's way of constituting regions for scientific investigation. To go back, to this foundational, right? The fundamental ontology is basically the interpreted modalities of self-understanding. So Heidegger is again going to begin with the understanding and the pre-understanding before we get to the constituting of the regions for scientific investigation. So this delayering is still happening. You guys understand? I mean, you got this, right? Pretty good. Because this is a rupture, if you will, with many of the traditions, the foundations of discourse, right? The foundation of disciplines, right, is never really shaken by the fundamental ontology, right? Never blown out of the water, so to speak, right? And we were talking about earlier today about science. It really doesn't think. This is what Stanley, behind.
Heidegger said that.
Yeah, Heidegger said that. Science does not think. And this is really the issue in our times, right? In so many ways.
It organizes
all the things.
Parts
It
of
organizes,
science.
yes. And you have many levels to this, of course, to the techno-science level where it becomes materialistic, and you have a whole investigation from big pharma to procedures to what's considered healing, what's prescriptive, what's descriptive, etc. But does not think. And this is his question here. Yeah, really a question. It's as early as being in time. He'll go to this question later, in his later work, after the so-called turn in the letter on humanism. But it's present already in being in time. You see this struggle in the disciplines. Yeah, what are the regions, right? Yeah. So, anyway. And for him, it's still based on the Greek, Stanley loves getting into this thing about Latin today, huh? But, that was funny. He forgot. He thought it was, we've forgotten the Latin. We forgot the Greek. So anyway, okay, so we'll go on. We'll use Jaretta's phrase. I guess she's not up to the task, but we'll continue while Rome burns. And Trump's granddaughter sings Mandarin folk ballads to the Chinese. So Chris, I'm going to email you this week. I'm sorry, I got back from Montreal and then I was swamped. But I read it over and I'm ready to, engage in a real dialogue with it. I've got it mapped out on a piece of paper. I'll transpose it to you. Yeah.
Nope, I didn't mean to hurry you.
No, it's okay. You're not hurrying me. I just should have done. Thank you, Sean. You should have should have done it earlier. Is my point. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Good. Thanks. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Everybody, I hope you can make my performance on Tuesday. If you can't, that's all right.
Send us another email
I'm going to send
to
you.
remind
The
us.
other one was.
Good.
I have to be my
Thank you, David.
publicity
Thank you.
person at this point.
David, do you mind if I take a quick look at
Ruling.
on our rent book? Yeah, I just want to take a quick look at that. And the House of Government in the USSR? After the where everybody lived, they had a place called the House of Government.
In
Like
the 20s?
Bukharin was in
by the
room
river, by the river.
474.